be repetitious, wouldn't it? Okay, let's just go. 3 limiting beliefs that are gigantic dream killers. The reason why I wanted to talk about this today is because if we imagine ourselves the behavior of who we are, or basically, there's human beings, which is us, and then there's our behaviors. One of the mistakes I think people sometimes make and where they get hung up in life is that they start to think or assume that they are their behavior, or that somebody else is the behavior. And what happens is we start to view ourselves or we view somebody else through the lens of the behavior. Meaning that, let's say that I was late one time. I was late a couple times. You may start labeling me as my behavior. Jesse, he's always late. Jesse's always late. And then what comes with that is your belief systems about what being late is, right? Which may not be so positive. If an easy example of this is if you've ever known someone who has committed some sort of crime, right? What happens with them? They go from being a human being, Joe, Janet, Jane, to being this criminal. And the label that they have is this: oh yeah, he's a thief. He's a, she's a this, he's a that. And so we then view them through the lens of all that we believe about that behavior. Does this make sense? So let's separate the two for a moment and realize that human beings are human beings and behaviors are behaviors, and human beings do behaviors. Now, what's going to drive or govern or operate so many of the behaviors we do is our belief system. What we believe to be true, what we believe to be false, what we believe to be fiction or fact. Easiest example of this I can give you is look at politicians. Look at politicians. And let's go a little further. If I say the name Donald Trump, depending on what your belief system is, that likely stirred up some emotion in you. Some of you might say, oh, he's the most amazing thing since sliced bread. Some of you might say, I absolutely hate that person. He's the worst thing ever. He's the worst thing since sliced bread. Right? I don't even need to say anything else. I could just say his name and I'm ready to there's a reaction. I could say something afterwards too. I could say Donald Trump did a really horrible thing today. And then all the people who already believe that about him are going to go, yeah, that's true. And I could say something like Donald Trump did a really amazing thing today and donated, money to help these orphan children in some remote part of the world. And if you already have the belief about him of him not being good, bad, whatever it is, you don't even hear that, or you might have some sort of justification or excuse or whatever it is to help your belief system stay true. Does this make sense? So beliefs are going to govern behaviors, and as human beings, we do behaviors, we are not our behaviors. That's really important to conceptualize because we have these belief systems and they're going to create the results we get in our life. If we find ourselves producing results that we don't want to produce, meaning we find ourselves stuck or we're settling for less than we believe we deserve, we found ourselves playing small at a time when we know that we have something inside of us that could be really big and great. We find ourselves settling for an unacceptable standard in a relationship. We find ourselves justifying our poor health that we're doing to ourselves. Not saying that things don't happen, but the stuff that we're self-imposed. We find ourselves making excuses about why our business is struggling or floundering. We find ourselves staying stuck in a unresourceful state, right? I'm sad all the time, I'm upset all the time, I'm angry all the time, I'm depressed all the time, whatever that is. Those are behaviors. If we look at those things as behaviors, what we can understand then is that there's going to be some sort of belief that's going to fuel that behavior. And one of the first big limiting beliefs that I want to talk about with you today that is a gigantic dream killer is the belief that we might have that I'm too old or I'm too young. I'm too young or I'm too old. What do I mean by this? Somewhere along the line, someone told us that you had to be a certain age to do certain things. Right? Somewhere along the line, someone told us we had to be a certain age to do certain things. And that belief can creep into so many facets of our life. I'm too young to have kids and get married. I'm too young to have kids and sail around the world. I'm too old to have kids and get married. I'm too old to take off and sail around the world. I'm too young to start my own business. I haven't learned enough. I'm too old to start my own business. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm too old to train for a marathon. I'm too young to train for a marathon because my joints aren't strong enough. I'm too old to train for a marathon because my joints aren't strong enough. Right? The list goes on and on and on. But when we believe that about ourselves, meaning that our biological age presents a limitation on what we can and can't do, it sets us on a course for always settling for less than we could have. A really powerful example. How many of you were raised in the belief system? I was. How many of you were raised in the belief system that to get a good job, you had to go to school and go to college, and then once you got this little piece of paper, it would suddenly qualify you to have a great job? And then all of a sudden, when you had your little piece of paper, everybody would come banging down on your door saying, oh my gosh, we want to hire you. Right? How many of you bought into that? What's the pretense on that there, right? It's almost to say that you're too young to get a great job without college. Now, how many of you who have been told that didn't go to college, but then you get older and you say, wow, it'd be really cool to go back to school, but what? I can't go back to school. Why? Because, and this is the interactive part, fill in the blank, type it in. I'm too, starts with an O, rhymes with mold, and you would say there's only 3 letters to it. Old, there's one. Old, too old, right? And then what does that mean to ourselves? We have basically put a limitation on what we can do in life. We've told ourselves, I cannot get more education. I cannot go back to school because I'm too old. I cannot get a great job right now because I'm too young. There we go. Instagram's catching up. Old, 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 old. Every time we buy into this BS of too young or too old, we subscribe to a life of less than what we could have. And I say BS because here's the thing. Our belief systems can sometimes be bullshit, especially if the belief systems that are the primary drivers in our life, meaning they're the one operating the wheel of our life more often than not, are the belief systems that bring us limit and lack. We are settling for always far less than what we could have. Does this make sense? So the belief system that I'm too old or too young to whatever it is, the second big limiting belief that so many of us have that are gigantic dream killers is I can't afford it. I can't afford it. Now, before we go into the, well, you don't know what my financial situation is, before you don't know what's in my bank account, blah, 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 right? All of us have likely had some sort of financial challenge at some point in our life. All of us have likely had some sort of just challenge in our life. And if we were to remove money aside and eliminate it from the equation, what we would probably arrive at is realizing that the reality is can we really afford not to? See, usually when we say a limiting belief or we buy into the BS of a limiting belief, what that does is it cuts off any possibility for us to ask questions and determine how we really could. If I tell myself I can't afford something, right, what I'm saying is absolutely no way, no scenario, 100% it's completely impossible that I could do this. What would happen if instead of saying I can't afford it and believing that, what would happen if I instead had a belief that I believe it's possible that I can? I believe it's possible that I can. Most of us aren't willing to go there with ourselves. And history is ripe and filled with people who have been up against immense financial challenges or challenges about what they need to do to make change, and they somehow seem like it's not possible. They can't afford the money, they can't afford the time, they can't afford the energy, they can't afford the effort, they can't afford diverting their attention away from what they're doing onto this. But yet they believe enough in what they want, and they choose to subscribe to listening to that voice inside of them that whispers quietly that they can, as opposed to tuning into the obnoxious voice that says you can't or you're unable to. And when those people do it, they do extraordinary things, don't they? You know, in some of our most recent celebrated people, one of the people that I look up to, like an Anthony Robbins, so broke, had 4 different fathers, worked for a janitor part-time, had $0 to his name, now has a net worth of some hundreds of millions of dollars and is recognized all over the world. A Richard Branson, multi-billionaire who's done numerous things for charity and revolutionizing how we travel, was told when he was a young kid that he would be a miracle if he didn't end up in jail. Right? There's countless stories of this, and history is filled with them. People who were told that they couldn't do something, that they couldn't afford it, yet they just refused to subscribe to it. Branson was brilliant in that when he was offered the opportunity to form Virgin Atlantic, the airplane company, he was told that financially he couldn't afford it. But he refused to say that. He refused to buy into that. Because what he wanted more than anything is he wanted to believe that he could. And he believed that he could contribute something significantly to travel. And what he did instead was start to ask himself powerful questions like, if I could, how would I? If I could, how could I make this possible? What will it take for me to do this? Can I really afford not to do this? Most of us, when we hear a limiting belief, we stop there and we say, finish, finito, that's it. If we were to gift ourselves with asking ourselves some powerful questions about possibility, about how we could, life would change for so many of us like this. Many of you have heard my story before, that when I hired my first business mentor, first coach, I did it at a time in my life where I was over $26,000 in debt. I had literally maybe $30-some to my name. And I was waiting for somebody to pay me cash because I was going to use that money to buy food. I was walking to the appointment, and the appointment I rescheduled probably 3 times already that day. And right before I got there, I checked my phone. I saw there was a missed call from the person who I was going to meet up with. And my heart just sank because I knew they were probably calling to cancel. Sure enough, I listened to the message and couldn't make it in. I was crushed because I had nothing but debt and a few bucks to my name, and I was thinking, how in the hell am I going to get food, let alone pay rent and pay for other things in life? And that was the time I made my decision to hire my first coach, because I realized that what I was doing was not getting me to where I wanted to go. And what it was doing instead was it was keep me on a path that was going to keep giving me the results I'd always gotten. I knew I wanted something different, and the only way I was going to get something different is if I did a radical change in how I thought, felt, moved, and believed. And I knew that I couldn't do it alone. Because if I could do it alone, I would have done it already, right? But that didn't happen. So I hired someone to help me break through what was holding me back, and that made a magnificent difference in my life. The reason I did that was because I allowed myself to focus on the future I wanted more than I fixated on the limitations I perceived in the present. See, we will often, when we come to these moments of decision, we focus so much on our perceived limitations in the present that we miss gazing out into the magnificent future that is available to all of us. If you want to make an amazing change in your life and you come up against these limiting beliefs, I'm too young, I'm too old, I can't afford it, you have to be bold enough to gaze off into the future and paint a picture bright enough for yourself there that whatever decision you make now is worth the effort to get there. Because otherwise, if you fixate and focus solely on the limitations that come from your limiting beliefs, your belief systems, remember BS, you will always find that you will struggle to always get to where you could go. And more tragically than that is you will live so much of your life always wondering what could have been. Now that voice that whispers that you're meant for more will quiet with time, but it will still be there. And for me, I don't know about any of you, and maybe some of you can relate to this. That defines tragedy for me. It defines tragedy for me that somebody might die with full potential because they were never courageous enough to pursue it. The last limiting belief, big one I want to talk about today, that's a gigantic dream killer. The belief that this is as good as it gets. This is as good as it gets. This is as good as it gets. Right? How many of us have said that? Or maybe we didn't articulate it exactly that way, but we thought, well, okay, well, here it is. Here's a question for you all, and show of emojis, thumbs up, whatever it is, or you can type it in, me. How many of you have ever been in a relationship You have remained in the relationship knowing that the relationship was not the relationship of your dreams, knowing that the relationship was not exactly what you wanted, knowing that you desired much more than you're going to get in a relationship, and knew that the person you were in the relationship with was not going to be that person to give you those things, yet you remained in the relationship because you thought, well, it's as good as it gets. You remained in the relationship because you thought, well, it's better to be here than be alone. You remained in the relationship because you thought at the time that you didn't deserve any better. Or that the fact that you had someone was better than having no one. Even though day in and day out you would constantly go through these little pinpricks of pain that would sometimes be even more calamitous, like a hammer coming down and whack over you because of the pain of the relationship. Yet you would precipitate a story about why you should be there and remain in there. I see quite a few yeses, me's, and emojis going across, so I think this is one that you can all relate to, or many of you can relate to. Because we settle and say it's as good as it gets. Now, similarly to before, when we get to that place, that settling mentality, we still have the voice that whispers that we're meant for more. And any of you have ever had that voice that whispers that beautiful, sweet words that were meant for more, you know it comes with a feeling, doesn't it? It's a feeling that you feel that is unmistakable and unlike anything else. Because there's nothing in our day-to-day life that relates to it other than when we know with absolute certainty that there's something more for us. But we can't have that voice talking too much because it might get us to do something different, like make a change. So we quickly dim it down with fear, with justifications, with excuses, with the reasons why we can't. And we fuel those fears, justifications, reasons why we can't with limiting beliefs, the bullshit of why it's impossible, whether I'm too young, I'm too old, whether I can't afford it, or whether this is as good as it gets. Right? So many people have so little. Why should I be selfish and want more? You want more because you want more, and that's awesome. It's just a matter of you're going to be courageous enough to go and get it. Most people aren't. Most people aren't. There's a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying, and so many of those regrets illustrate much of what we discuss right now. Right? Here's a really big kick in the pants with all this. As a little bonus, I would say one of the biggest fears, or maybe not even fears, but one of the biggest hang-ups around why we don't get what we want is because we focus so much on money and the lack of money in our life. Money's just a piece of paper. What we're really after within all that is we're after the feeling that we get from the money, the emotion. See, what I'm offering with you today and discussing with you today is by clearing out some of these limiting beliefs, you will have access to the emotion that you want all the time. As they say, money can't buy happiness, and that's very true because happiness comes from within you. And happiness is something that we create within ourselves, and the way we do that is we get rid of the BS that obstructs us from doing that. If we get to a place of settling and saying this is as good as it gets, what happens? We're basically saying this is our baseline and this is where we'll be. Now, when seasons come through, we'll wilt and wane. And just like a flower in a garden who's deprived of the optimal amount of sun and nourishment and nutrients and light, it will eventually start to fade away and lose some of its magnificent glow. We will do exactly the same if we don't do what we know we need to do. If we don't find the courage within ourselves to listen to that voice that's quietly whispering that we're meant for more. I see so many of you on here week after week, and so I know that you must be kindred spirits like myself who want more out of life. But the question is what are you going to do to get it? What are you going to do to get it? I cannot tell you all how many times I've offered to meet with you and how many people actually do. How many of you on here have sent me an email before wanting to know how to do something, wanting to know how to make a change, wanting to know how to make a shift, and then you don't do that, which I write back to you to do? Be honest. Why? Because in the moment you get some motivation, you get some oomph behind you. And then you do the absolute worst thing that you could ever do, which is do nothing. Which is do nothing. And if we do nothing, nothing is going to be fueled by so many of our BS limiting belief systems. Violet, who's on here on the Facebook Live version, Violet took one of my courses several years ago. And rather than doing nothing, she took action. She has now taken a passion of hers and turned it into a profitable business that is in, I don't know how many countries, a bunch of local stores, right? Because she took action with it. And that's the thing is, we are the ones that are responsible for the results that we produce in our life. We are the ones that are responsible for our circumstances. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not ignorant to the fact that really bad stuff happens to some really amazing people. And that's a tragedy of life. But it doesn't have to define our life. If we allow that stuff to define our lives, that's on us. That's not on it. That's on us. Because what happened, happened, but it's us making the choice to allow what happened to define our lives now. You want to radically change your life? You want to wake up tomorrow feeling happier, healthier, more refreshed? You got to do something to change it. You want to be here, it's April 20th, 2017, and you want to be on this April 20th, 2018 and say to me, Jesse, after that talk, I did this, this, and this, and I made an amazing change, and now my life is so different, then you got to be willing to push past the belief systems, the BS that holds you back. Folks like myself and other coaches out there, whoever that is in a professional in the field that you're wanting to work on, are there to help and support you. I realize that I may not be everybody's cup of tea. Every time I meet with a prospective client about coaching, I tell them, do not decide to coach with me, to do a coaching program with me, because you think you should. Only decide to do a coaching program with me because you feel that you're in the right place at the right time in your life. And that this is what, and no matter how scary it feels to make the decision to do it, deep down inside, there's that quiet whisper saying, you're on the right path. This is your next step. Please, if I could leave you with one final thing before we summarize and we open up to questions, it's this. Please, with all my heart, do not dim that voice. Do not ignore it. Do not make it be silent. Do not lock it away in some dark room to ignore it and not pay attention to it. Do not dim it any more than it ever has been. That is one of your most beautiful and most greatest gifts. And if you will find the courage inside to push through the BS, the limiting belief systems, and listen to that voice, embrace that voice, nurture that voice, and do everything with every ounce of who you are to pursue making that voice the driver of your life, your life will be more beautiful, more amazing, more special, more fantastic than you might ever be able to realize. Okay, so really quick recap of the 3 limiting beliefs, if you don't have them already, that are the gigantic dream destroyers, and then we'll open this up for a Q&A. Number 1, and there's more than this too. So one of the questions I had to you is if you have a limiting belief that may have popped to your attention that I didn't cover today and you want to share it, type it in the comments. These definitely are not a definitive list, but these are just 3 of the big ones that come up a lot. So number 1, we have, I'm too young, I'm too old. Number 2 is I can't afford it, and affording it is not necessarily just money. It can also be I can't afford the time, I can't afford the energy, I can't afford the effort. It's just most of the time we'll usually say I can't afford it because of money. And number 3 is this is as good as it gets. Basically, I'm settling, this is as good as it gets. Has this been helpful? Has this been valuable to you all? I have about 10 minutes or so for questions. So what questions do you have about this? Ever thought of doing a TED? Yes, that is one of my goals. It absolutely is. I would love to. Absolutely love to. So if anybody on here watching has any sort of connections with TED, please let me know. I was always taught that you just get a job. Oh, that went away. 13 countries and 2 stores. That's Violet's number. So I mentioned what Violet's been able to do. 13 countries and 2 stores her products are in. 13 countries and 2 stores. Yes, helpful, valuable, helpful for sure. Awesome. No worries, Tasha. If you want to watch the replay, you can hop over onto the 1 Year 1000 Challenge Facebook page, and I'll have the replay up there. Lebanon, hello, Lebanon in the house. Helpful, helpful. Any questions about this? How cool is it that we have people from, gosh, I wonder how many countries we have on here. We have at least 4 different continents. So it's got to be more. Can't live by just setting, I agree. TEDx is a good idea. I definitely would love to get into TEDx. You're very welcome. So helpful. How do I get unstuck? I'm drowning in despair. I would go back to, so I want to keep the questions fairly focused on some of what we discussed today. And what I would say is look at, see, here's the thing with stuckness. For us to be stuck, there has to be an emotion behind it to keep us stuck. So we'll never hear somebody say, I'm stuck, I'm happy. Right? There's always going to be an emotion behind it. And that emotion carries with it fuel, right? Emotion and emotion are interconnected. In that stuckness is going to be fueled by some sort of limiting belief. A limiting belief of what we believe we can or can't have. A limiting belief about what we believe about our life. And so if we want to get unstuck as it relates to what we discussed today, we have to look at the beliefs that we have limiting us and limiting our life and address and change those beliefs. Because it's when we change our limiting beliefs and we eliminate them altogether, that's when life transforms. That's when life transforms. But you're going to always struggle to live life at the level you want if you allow limiting beliefs to be in the driver's seat of your life. Great question. I see Ireland, Spain, Iowa, Argentina. So what are we, is it 4 or 5 different continents we have on here? Awesome. How do you keep moving forward with your business to grow where you want without letting the limiting beliefs trickle in? I would look at first is what the limiting beliefs are, and I say to the question before look at eliminating them. Because the way that question is asked, it's almost like saying, how can I do this? And I know those limiting beliefs are there, so I'm going to keep doing this, but try not to let them in, right? It's implying that forward growth comes with limiting beliefs. It's like you're in the car driving, and rather than them being in the driver's seat, they're holding on to the passenger doors waiting to jump in. I would look at just ditching the baggage and getting rid of the limiting beliefs altogether. And think of it as going on an airplane and only carrying on a carry-on. Amazing experience. You don't have to wait before you get your bags afterwards. And it's much faster if you go through customs. Great question. I would love to make some radical changes in my life, but I'm fearful about the impact on my 3 teenage children as I'm a single mother and I really want to live a life full of freedom, self-expression, and joy. That's a wonderful question. And I think we might end with this. If I have time for one more question, I'll take it. But I think we will end with this because this is a really powerful thought to consider. Most of the time when we're coming to that crossroads about making a decision about taking our life and going from the path that we've been on to a new path, the new path that we want to travel, most of the time when we get there, we will get there and we only focus on the present, the pain of the present, the challenge of the present, whatever goes with the present. And we don't take the time to gaze to the magnificent future. The magnificent future that is waiting for us if we change, if we make the changes. Sometimes with kids, and I'm not necessarily, do you say your name? Is it Clara? I guess that's an L. Sorry, I had squinty eyes and I couldn't see if that was an I or an L. It looks like it's Clara. I'm not saying this is you specifically, Clara, but I want to use this as an example. Oftentimes, the changes we want to make, deep down inside of us, we know they're changes we need to make, right? And more often than not, those changes that we need to make, especially as a parent, those changes are coming from probably one of those pure places of love possible. Self-love and greater love for family. And in the long run, what will happen is that's going to become, see, here's the thing. Let's say that the changes that you make right now cause a little bit of disruption in the day-to-day life of your kids. Is it unfortunate? Yes. But you have to ask yourself, is now or the future and the rest of their life more important? Because you, at the end of the day, are going to be the example that they set for what a woman can be in life. You are the example of what and how bright you choose to shine is going to be the light that they get to bask in. How brightly do you want your kids to shine in life? Right? That's a question I encourage every parent to ask, because your kids are going to model behavior that parents do. So those of you who are settling for less than desirable relationships, guess what you're priming your child to believe about relationships? Right? Those of you who are in a chaotic household, and think about what your kids are taking away. Those of you who are refusing to lose weight that you know you need to lose, what example is that setting for your children? And those of you who know you need to change, want to change, and must change, but don't, what example is that setting for your kids? And here's the real test of this, and I encourage each and every one of you to ask this for yourself, especially if you have kids. If it were my children in the same position that I am now, what would I want for them? What would I want for them? See, most of the times, and I've seen this happen with people, is we'll have this behavior pattern that we do, that we think that we're doing things to try to protect our kids, but really what we're doing is we're doing things to protect ourselves from confronting our fears, from bypassing our excuses and diving into dealing with the BS of our belief systems. But if we're really, really honest with ourselves, in a beautiful moment of honesty, we will find that we are ultimately the examples that we set for others in the world. And if our kids were in a situation that we were, we would want them to do that which they know could bring them freedom, could bring them happiness, could bring them joy, could bring them self-expression and fulfillment. And if we do anything now that leads us on a path that is going to provide us with less than that, we are not realizing our potential for the examples that we can set for our children. I believe, one of my beliefs I have about parents is that parents have a responsibility to their children to live the most extraordinary life possible. Because each child, I believe, deserves to have an extraordinary example about what's possible. I really hope you take that to heart. And when I say you, I mean all of you who are listening to this. I believe that every parent, it is their responsibility to live the most extraordinary life possible. Because I believe that every child deserves the most extraordinary example about what's possible. That's a fantastic question, Clara. And thank you so much for asking it. And I think that's a